Good, y'all. Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. You know what it is. Figured we needed to cover this. I'll tell you why in a moment. What's up, Javon? See Truth, Hybrid Ninja. Always good to see you three. Appreciate the support. Hope you guys are well. We got a little piece dealing with kids, since that was some of the theme of yesterday. What's up, Donnie? And ran across something that made me want to look more into it. But first and foremost, if you didn't see the thumbnail, I wanted to explain it. It's a young man with a fractured jaw, lost a couple of his teeth. And this is a piece. That image is actually comes out of an article from 2016 entitled, when you can find it on mic.com, mic.com, Baltimore school tutor charged with child abuse and Trayvon Grayson beating. And says authorities have charged a Baltimore school tutor with multiple counts of felony child abuse after allegedly breaking 7-year-old Trayvon Grayson's jaw and knocking out several of his teeth. This is ridiculous. Apparently, it was a project employee, Timothy Randall Core, 25 years old, 225 pounds, accused of violently disciplining Grayson by throwing him against the wall, seriously injuring him. And then Core says Grayson tripped and then injured himself. But I wanted to at least explain the thumbnail so it didn't completely come out of nowhere. This is an actual case. You're welcome to look more into it. And it definitely says something about how we need to manage working with our children, particularly our young boys. Understand the need for discipline. We can easily get off the rails if you don't have experience, training at least, on how to deal with kids, right? Anyway, let me see. What's up, Micah? Good to see you. Yeah. So anyway, y'all know what it is. Like the video, share it, join, donate, support the channel so we can keep things moving. Trying to increase my output here so I can put hopefully some credible information in your hands that you might be able to use to better assess what it is we're dealing with on a variety of topics as they pertain most particularly to Black men and boys. Today is no different. Today I wanted to take a look at child mistreatment, maltreatment, Black child maltreatment to be more particular. And this is a subject that ran across my desk kind of out of the blue. I was just kind of bumping around Twitter the other day, and I ran across something that kind of inspired me to want to look into this a little more. And I'll show you. It was basically a tweet that came from Dr. Curry observing some data that Dr. Stacy Patton posted. Now, we'll get into the data in a minute. I got plenty for you. But she posted a couple charts. And one thing she said is, she says, look at the numbers. Black America must confront the fact that our children are abused and killed at significantly higher rates than other groups of children. And she's absolutely right. Especially when you take into account population size, our kids tend to deal with more than others. But Dr. Curry observed this and made another observation. He says this will never be a mainstream conversation because of the majority of the perpetrators are women. We must start thinking about these issues scientifically with an eye to public health. And I found that to be quite important. Right? How many public health issues do we avoid because the perpetrators don't fit the parameters of what it is we think they should fit? See, if the primary perpetrators of child maltreatment were Black males, I think this would be far more prevalent in the media. It would be used to reinforce the boogeyman argument that we tend to see in general, and most particularly on Twitter. Twitter is ridiculous. The hatred and misandry toward black men is just off the chain, and it's like a machine gun. It's on a shot on a regular basis. Absolutely ridiculous. But again, I think it'd be different if we actually, if men and black men in particular were the leading aggressors or perpetrators in this dynamic. And as usual, I think Dr. Curry is right. I think in many ways we still have a fairly chivalrous eye and a fairly chivalrous political mobilization kind of sensibility. We really don't tend to raise any serious issues when we find women to be the primary perpetrators of something. And it's interesting. It's such we're so hesitant to hold women accountable, because I've been saying this for years. We do not handle female evil well at all. We try to, imagine it doesn't exist. And when it's cold in our face and we can't deny it anymore, we try to find men to blame, as if somehow now adults are no longer responsible for their behavior. When it comes to gender, men always kind of have to be the source. And in the black community, black men have to be the source. And as long as we're unwilling to look at the data for what it is and raise new questions, we're always going to be a step behind trying to figure out why things are happening. Now, a number of months ago, I introduced a concept I referred to as Black andromortality. And basically what that meant is it was a survey of Black male death. Now, we're not going to be dealing explicitly with death, but it is going to come up today. But I posed that concept because we are so used to dancing around information based on who's responsible, who are the primary aggressors. The politics of that are such that we don't pay attention to the realities often of what we're looking at, to save face and to be chivalrous. That seems to be one of our primary points of focus, right? If men are responsible, we go into that all day. If women are responsible, it's not so important. We can tap it down and somehow on the back end blame men. And we leave it at that. So when I posted this on my Facebook page, I think it's the very first response I got from a brother. And I mean, I'm not dissing the brother. He's a sound brother. We get along well. But I just noticed, I observed the very first response I got was, I need evidence of this. Now, normally a request for evidence, I'm all for. But I find it interesting when the spirit of asking for evidence when women are the aggressors in a dynamic, or they're to be held accountable to a greater degree because of what they've done, the request for evidence doesn't seem to be as altruistic and objective as it should be. It seems to be done in a spirit of wanting to protect women. And again, this is why I call it a chivalrous gesture. We do not hold women accountable. I've said it many a time. Women are sentenced 65% less for the same crimes as men. And when you talk about juries have a very difficult time holding women accountable for crimes. Very difficult. And it doesn't take, extreme excuses to get women off for heinous crimes. It really doesn't. Yes, there are documented cases. You can check Warren Farrell's Myth of Male Power. Documented cases where one's monthly was used as a justification for, murder, and it worked. Other cases where postpartum, of course, is used, even though we showed empirically that men suffer from postpartum more than women. And I don't know how many of you have ever heard of a case of a man getting off a heinous crime due to postpartum. Right? So we know women can get off because of postpartum depression, even though men suffer from it more. I've never heard of a case where a man has gotten off because of postpartum depression. Never. Now, I'm not saying it hasn't happened. I just haven't seen it. So that being said, I think this is something we got to deal with. So in relation to some of the charts that Dr. Patton posted, I decided to look them up. And then in particular, I found one that I said, you know what? I think I want to delve through this with a little more depth. And so I was actually going to do this show about an hour ago, but I kind of wanted to dig up some stuff and look around. So here we go. So this is you know what? Let me go ahead and put this link in the comments now. This is a PDF, Child Maltreatment 2020. I'll also put this in the description. All right, but here we go. So you can look through what it looks like. Child Maltreatment 2020. And there's some interesting data in here about not only Black children, but children in general, that I think is important for us to have a better sense of. What's up, Tim? How you doing? All right. All right. Appreciate that, Kiel. Hope I didn't mispronounce your name. Thanks for the support. Yeah, and GC says something very important to this. He says, meanwhile, when a Black man asks for sources when people make outrageous claims about us, people simply say, Google it. Google is free. Absolutely. And in many ways, you don't often even need documentation to slander Black men. It's well accepted. It's considered true because it's been stated, which is interesting. That's why I find it a little disingenuous when we start pointing out other demographics that are responsible for heinous crimes, and all of a sudden the focus changes. But let's look at this. We're going to look at roughly about 5 different areas that I thought it important to just keep in mind and kick around. And again, as usual, I'd like to hear your thoughts and responses in the comments section about some of these things. And I'm sure some of you even have experiences to bring to bear. All right, so this is the first chart we're going to look at here, right? For those of you who decide to go through this on your own, this is page 22, right? Exhibit 3D, victims by age, right? So one things you can tell, and this basically what I'm going to use these charts for is just for us to get a sense of what exactly is going on with child maltreatment. So the first thing to note in this is that the overwhelming majority of children who are victims of maltreatment are below the age of 1, right? The most vulnerable tend to be those to be abused the most. And then to some of us, that seems like basic information, but it's good to understand the overarching tropes so that when we actually talk about Black children, particularly Black male children, as it relates to child maltreatment, we want to actually have a sense of the area. Right. Now, this is Dr. Patton's area. This is not mine. My area has to do with Black boys and men in general. So I'm more of a generalist in relation to her, where this is her main focus. So she would have a lot more to bring to bear on the subject as a whole. But I just thought these are some interesting areas that most people should have a better grasp of, particularly those of us who are interested in examining the lives of Black males. So first thing to point out, right, is that this is the dynamic. And as it says right beneath it, the percentages of child victims are similar for both boys and girls. Boys at 48.1%, girls at 51.6%. Right? Sex is unknown for 0.3% of victims. The FY 2020 victimization rate for girls is 8.9 per 1,000, which is higher than boys at 7.9 per 1,000. So we'll get into that in a moment. Boomer hooked. Appreciate that support. All right. So that's the first thing. So we're just kind of getting warmed up, right? Looking at some different areas at random. Not going to keep you here all night. Just thought some good information to drop in your pocket. So page 42, right? There's a few pages here we're going to look at. So the first thing, victims by sex. Right? And we can see that the raw numbers across states, if you're looking at purely at victims by sex across all states, 52 states reporting, apparently. You have 297,000 boys and 319,000 girls. Now, this is, across race, right? So we know the rate of maltreatment victimization for boys is 9.5 per 1,000. For girls, 12 per 1,000. So obviously, girls in general are victims to child maltreatment a little bit more than boys. Now, I'll be honest. I think, for the most part, when we talk about violence, when we talk about abuse, and we talk about boys, I think there's enough ground to raise the question if we dismiss even conceptualizing, even interpreting what boys experience that may be classified as abuse, do we miss it entirely because we associate boys with violence? Like, I question to what extent our tropes and interpretations, the frameworks that we use to even interpret boys in general, if that plays a role in how we even classify or report. See, much of this study is based on what's been reported. And I question whether or not boys get reported as much based on how we interpret boyhood and boys in general. Whether we're talking about, boys sucking it up and just walking it off, whether we're talking about, parents who look at boys as, really needing to endure more so they don't report such things. I'm just curious. I don't know. Let's continue. So, page 43. Victims by race or ethnicity, 2020. Now, these are obviously by state, right? So we know the first category is African American. Got American Indian, Asian, Hispanic, multiple race, Pacific Islander, and then white. So let's go ahead and check out at the bottom. 128,061 Black African American children, right? If we go all the way to the other side, 261,099 whites. With, I believe this is Latinos at 143. Yes, Hispanic, excuse me. Right. Now, this is interesting because when you look at the raw numbers, it's roughly a little more than twice. Whites have twice as many as Black in terms of the raw numbers of victims by race. We also have to factor in that we're a much smaller population. So that suggests, as Dr. Patton pointed out, abuse is much higher in the Black community, right? Overall. That's one of the things to pay attention to. Right? So again, we're just looking at tropes. We're just making sense of the tropes. So we know, that children under the age of 1 tend to be abused more. We know that Black children tend to have a second highest abuse rate, right under whites, apparently, or at least numbers. Yeah, appreciate that, Haitian. He says we need more of this unapologetically and how Black mothers are doing this and not being called out. Absolutely, we do. Because Black fathers would not have that luxury were we the primary aggressors. Let's continue. So victims by race or ethnicity again, and this one is more by percentage. So if you go down to the bottom, you see the breakdown. 13.2 for African American, 15.5 for American Indian or Alaska Native, right? And then we go over to white, I believe, at 10.3. So basically, no, I'm sorry. That's a multiple race. So white is all the way to the right. So white is at 7.4. White is at 7.4. Mixed race 10.3. American Indian 15.5. Black at 13.2. So again, even though it's an extremely small population, you have an extremely high kind of rate per thousand of children being abused. Right. Okay. Continuing on, maltreatment types of victims. Right? Maltreatment types of victims. So we have, the overall number of victims by state, medical neglect, other physical abuse, psychological maltreatment, sexual abuse, sex trafficking, unknown, right? And so what we find here is that the most extreme type of abuse is, if we go to the bottom, so we got total numbers of victims, 618,000. And the highest number by far, in terms of types of abuse, at 470,000, is neglect. That is the principal form of abuse, neglect. Now tell me how the pandemic impacted that. Right? So again, we're just looking at tropes. Okay, let's see. All right. Appreciate those in the chat cleaning it up and getting rid of strags or whatever else is going on. Not strags. Getting rid of whatever's going on in there that doesn't have any business in being there. But much appreciated. All right. So the next one up, maltreatment types of victims, right? And so again, we look at the different types and we can tell that overall, this is just breaking down what the last chart did, but by percentage, right? 76%. Is that, let me see. Yeah, I believe that's it. 76% of the types of abuse we're looking at nationally, 76% are neglect. So, this is the biggest category. And again, this is important because when we think of maltreatment, most of us think of, somebody being physically beaten, and those are important. Somebody being trafficked, somebody being sexually violated, and they are in here in this chart. That is important for us to know. Sexual abuse, you can see it here broken down by state. It said sexual abuse overall is at 9.4, right? Sex trafficking, so we hear that in the news a lot. It's at 0.2, right? So we can hear these different kinds. We can see this kind of breakdown here. And when we hear it in the news, of course, we know we need to pay a great deal of attention to it. But when you really look at the numbers, the primary expression of abuse seems to be neglect more than anything else, right? So that's another trope to pay attention to. All right. So what's next? Page 56, child fatalities by age, right? Yet again, below the age of 1. Right? So again, the more vulnerable, the more abused, fatalities. Now, fatalities by sex. So interesting to know that across race, there are slightly more boys than girls. I actually didn't know that. And that's mainly because in the Black community, the numbers, as boys age, drop off considerably. So there are more women than men, or males than females than males, excuse me. But according to this, overall, there's more boys than girls. And when you look at the child fatalities rate, right, 60%, 60.1% of the boys, 60.1% of the children who are fatalities by sex are boys. 39.5% are girls. So this is interesting to observe. Girls are victimized by maltreatment to a greater degree than boys. Boys apparently die to a greater degree than girls. Right. Let's look at some of the information below it. Nearly 90%, 88.1% of child fatalities are one of 3 races: white at 38.7%, African American 34.9%, or Hispanic 14.5%. Yeah, this is disturbing. Absolutely, Tim. This is the kind of stuff we got to know, right? Because it's we kind of have these things thrown at us, but we often don't know the details. So I just kind of want to give us a cursory glance and then give you something you can delve into yourself and cover whatever we haven't here. Or correct me if I've misframed something, right? Okay, child fatalities by race or ethnicity. Right? So we see the child population numbers, right? Let's see here. Yeah. So Timothy says Black boys are harmed way during the womb as well as out of the womb. This is a forbidden subject for discussion. Yeah. I can show you the top 10 causes of death, and you'll find that boys tend to die far more in the womb than girls. Yeah, this is significant. Yeah. But this is dealing with fatalities, meaning that, this is somebody engaged them and mistreated them. So that's a little different. But we still see the same tropes. Girls experience abuse more. They're trafficked a little more. They experience sexual abuse more, but boys die to a greater degree. And again, I still question how many even classify boys' victimization properly based on the assumptions we make about what children are supposed to be able to endure, most particularly boys. Right? But anyway, so looking at the child populations, we can tell, whites are the greatest population, nearly 29.5 million. Hispanics, 12.7 million. Blacks at 8.5. Right? Child fatalities. Now, based on the population size, you got over 29 million white children, 560 child fatalities. Black population, 504. We're only 13% of society. So, we have a very small community, and yet You look at the actual numbers of child fatalities. Yes, it's around 500 for 2020, but that's still high. And a lot of this is environmental. A lot of this has to do with poverty. A lot of this has to do with maltreatment that's very consistent in terms of that environmental influence. Shout out to Michael for the Cash App. Appreciate Timothy. Appreciate you. Great I9. Thank you very much. It says, and yet on social media, all we hear is black men, y'all need to stop killing us. Exactly. That is the primary thing we hear, despite what the evidence shows us. Again, looking at maltreatment types of child fatalities. So what this is breaking down here is that in terms of children who are killed, the majority died due to neglect at 73.7%. And I would argue that the pandemic only exacerbated those numbers. People were struggling, multiple jobs, you name it, or going without employment altogether. And one of the reports that I just ran across today, shout out to Julius and Adrian, brothers who definitely send me some quality information on a regular basis. There's a new report is confirming what most of us would assume. Right? Rates of rent rates, I should say, across the country are starting to shoot up. Right? So people are finding themselves having to leave in large numbers. I don't think the reporting is quite as thorough as it needs to be about that, but I think neglect is one of those things that can easily tend to happen in a context like that. Okay. All right. So let's look up. So what's the next one? Again, these are random. This particular document has a lot of information. I'm just choosing a few things that I think are great food for thought so that we can better understand what's going on overall in terms of Black child maltreatment. This is page 63, child fatalities by age. Right. And again, below the age of 1. That shouldn't be a surprise at this point. And this is the thing. Whatever the area, it's good to have an understanding of what the dominant tropes are. And you can test the data to see if that changes from year to year or period to period based on the study. But it's good to know what the dominant tropes are, because people can use and manipulate numbers. That's why I like to deal with raw numbers and percentages, and I just put them up on the screen. I don't control what the data says. I don't need to, try and fabricate it in some new kind of way to make it fit what I want it to fit. I'm just showing you what it says. Right. But some people try to play with numbers and play with percentages. And I had so much of that in grad school that I just can't stomach it. So I just want you to see the numbers and you make your own judgment. I'll give you my thoughts on what I think is happening, and I leave it at that. It's for you to do with as you need to. Right. But understanding the tropes helps us really understand human nature. This is why, when you look at suicide, for example, when it comes to men and women, you find that women initiate suicide to a far greater degree. They attempt it. Men commit suicide to a far greater degree. Those are some of the tropes. So looking at the trends and the tropes, I think, is incredibly important so we can understand how this works. Okay, so Great I9, shout out to you for that. He says, I work for a CP agency. Schools are calling in so many neglect cases. The CPS workers can't keep up. I believe it. I absolutely believe it. Yeah. Child fatalities by relationship to their perpetrators, 2020. Here we go. Right. So if you look at the far right, you can see the percentages that, are linked to the parent role or the role in general on the left. And you see it all broken down by percentages adding up to 100%. Starts with father only on the top left. At the very bottom goes all the way down to, total non-parents. And what we can see in terms of the largest percentage of those perpetrators who are committing child fatalities at 29%, mother only. So, father only households, or father only fatality perpetrators is at 14.3%. Two parents of known sex is at 23%, but mother only fatalities 29%. And see, and again, when I posted the charts and the conversation and the post and the observation by Dr. Curry on my Facebook page, again, the first response I got is, I need evidence. And I said, well, You can find the evidence easily, but just think in terms of common sense. The majority of child care providers in the home or in the facility are women. Whether you're talking about, mothers, whether you're talking about female family members, whether you're talking about childcare providers, or whether you're talking about teachers in schools, over 90% of the teachers, and it's higher than that, I believe, are female from K through 12. And hell, we can argue even through college for that matter. But at the end of the day, the majority of the childcare providers are female. So this is not to pathologize childcare providers, but that is what it is. Those who interact with the children the most tend to be the highest perpetrators, and most particularly the more vulnerable the child. So here's the dynamic: those who are caring for children to the greatest degree are female, and they tend to kill children who are the most vulnerable, below the age of 1. Again, look at the tropes, and the tropes will help you, kind of make sense of what it is we're looking at. Right? Right? We can even see, relatives at 5%. So if we thought it was higher than that, we know relatives it's higher than it should be, of course, but not quite as high as one might assume. Right? But it tends to come down to this. Okay? So let me see. Okay, so let me skip down to this one. All right, so we're looking at perpetrators by age. So we tend to know that the majority of perpetrator demographics places them at an age of 25 to 34. So really 18 to 44 is the dominant age framework, most particularly 25 to 34, that 10-year period, 9-year period. Right? So again, looking at trends and tropes. Right? So we know, child fatalities in Black communities are much higher than they need to be or should be at all. We know that the perpetrators are mostly female and tend to be mothers. And now we know the age range, 25 to 34. Now, this is not etched in stone for all time. This is just one report looking at 2020, but it's important to understand the trends and the tropes so we can have a better grasp of what's happening. And that way it's easier to compare data as new reports come out or other reports that have a slightly different focus. We can kind of look for how these trends work. Right? So more than 4/5, 83.2% of perpetrators are in the age range of 18 to 44. Absolutely. So if you heard tropes about older people or, extremely younger people like babysitters at 15, those are not the primary perpetrators of what we're looking at. And I think it's important for us to begin to frame that so we can better hone in on which groups are involved in this. And then this one, perpetrators by race and ethnicity, right? 48.4% are white, African Americans at 20.8%, Hispanics following right under at 20.1. Mm-hmm. And Jeffrey is absolutely right in the comment section. A lot of Black people that are raised in single parent homes grow up not realizing that they were abused. Absolutely. What's up, Officer Faulkner? I know this is an area you deal with, right? Yeah. This is what we're looking at. Perpetrators by race and ethnicity, you can see our largest percentages. And this is a consistent theme throughout the report. The 3 dominant racial groups that you'll find in most of these breakdowns that have the most extreme kind of numbers tend to be white, Black, and Hispanic. Although there are moments where, Native American pops through, but Black is definitely much higher than it needs to be. And so here you have some of the tropes as far as that perpetrator relationship, right? Kind of covering what we all and summating what we kind of looked at a second ago. Right? But again, just some good information. And I hope you will take the time to go through it on your own. Let's look at another set. Page 72, perpetrators by sex. Now, this is obviously broken down by state as well, right? And kind of shows you the percentages by sex of the perpetrators. So let's go down to the summation at the very bottom. 47.1% perpetrators are male, 52% are female. Right? It is what it is. So that's the first one. Let's continue. More on perpetrators by race and ethnicity. Right. Okay, so in terms of the numbers of perpetrators, you have 221,000 whites. I think this is Hispanic. Yep, 91,868 Hispanics. And blacks, 95,000. But again, when you control for population size, that's significant. That's significant. And again, these are issues that tend to be associated with impoverishment. It's not an accident that these numbers go up as economic issues are exacerbated. Right? Perpetrators by race and ethnicity. Again, this time we have the breakdown by percentage, by state, and this is critical. So on the far right, you have white at 48.4%, Hispanic at 20.1%, and black at 20.8%. So giving you a sense of what that looks like there. Perpetrators by relationships to their victims. So again, broken down by state: parent, child care provider, foster parent, friend and neighbor, group home, legal guardian, multiple relationships. Obviously, parents at 364,100. They are 77.2%, with 50 states reporting of those who are perpetrators to their victims. 2020. Right? Lets us know. So if you had questions about group homes, if you had questions about child care providers are basically 0.3%. Group homes at 0.2. That is not to say that group homes and child care providers can't be, perpetrators at all, but it is to say parents are the number one group. Right? The absolute number one group. So, I just wanted to give you some food for thought. Like I said, I wasn't going to do a dissertation. I wasn't going to hold you for a few hours, but I figure with these kind of conversations, there tends to be, a lot of irresponsibility about how things are just thrown around. And I actually wanted us to actually pause and look at it a little more critically with a verifiable source that we can look to. And that way, if we've misinterpreted the numbers or if there's something awry, we can take it back to this. In other words, when you say something in a communication in a tweet or on a Facebook post or even in a paper that you might be doing for a class you're in, it's good to be able to cite where you're getting it from for more than a couple of reasons. Obviously, if you've misidentified some data, you can be corrected because we know where to go back to. You can challenge people who just like to make shit up and throw it at you because it sounds good in the moment. There's a lot of that, especially in social media. And if the data changes from one period to another, we can actually look at this report and contrast it with another and make sense of the time difference, maybe the difference in how they focused on the information, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, I just wanted to give you something tangible you could hold on to look at to make better sense of what it is our children are grappling with. Who's abusing them? What are the demographics of those who are perpetrating this? And what are the tropes? So again, we know that girls tend to be trafficked to a slightly greater degree. They tend to experience sexual violation to a slightly greater degree. Boys tend to die to a greater degree. Perpetrators are overwhelmingly parents, overwhelmingly mothers, right? That exceeds other institutions who have influence over children. Right? These are some of the general tropes. I just wanted to kind of give that to you for food for thought. I'm very interested in your reflections, your experiences, what you have to bring to bear on this. So not going to hold you much longer than that. Shout out to Tim. Shout out to BGS. Appreciate the support in the chat. And if I missed your name, it is not personal. But I just wanted to kind of put this out here. I'm very interested to hear what you have to think of, what you have to say about it. And most importantly, what it is Black men can do. Because here's the thing that nobody's really talking about. If fathers have a lower number in terms of, perpetrating maltreatment or fatalities, and fathers are actually pushing for custody, excuse me, shouldn't this be something that family courts take into account? I mean, we talked about in the Black male political agenda that upon divorce, it is our argument that 50-50 custody should be the standard. And you qualify differences based on the particular family in question. That doesn't tend to happen anywhere near as much as it needs to. Fathers often find themselves on the outs trying to fight to get custody, even when they've demonstrated that they are a far better parent in the equation. I've reported cases over the last 10 years on social media where absolutely, horrible mothers, those who are hell, even getting out of prison and still don't have their lives straight, will tend to get custody over fathers who've been actually doing a great job. Now, I've just been reporting that on a case by case basis. I haven't found any larger data about that, but my point simply is the default parent, particularly in our culture, tends to be mothers. Sometimes, regardless of the information provided. Sometimes you have fathers that can prove that they're doing a far better job and still not get custody. And this is the kind of information that we need to be prepared to bring to bear for a variety of reasons. One, for the sake that we have a better understanding of it, but two, for those who may need this information for the betterment of their own family or household. So those fathers out there that are fighting for custody, hopefully this is another arrow in your quiver. Hopefully this doesn't pertain to your family, but if this is something you're grappling with, you're dealing with abuse, you're dealing with maltreatment, hopefully this information will be of use to you in trying to get our children into a safer space. Because this is the part of the equation that doesn't get talked about. It really doesn't. But anyway, appreciate the time. I will see you guys tomorrow. Y'all have a good one.